pharmacy clerk slid the receipt across the counter without looking at me. $347. That's what 1 month of insulin costs me now, after Medicare's deductible reset in January. I stood there in the fluorescent light of the Walgreens on Ridge Road, holding a debit card I already knew would decline. Behind me, a woman cleared her throat. I told the clerk I'd come back later and walked out into the February cold without my medication. That night, I called my oldest. He answered on the 4th ring, and I could hear glasses clinking, somebody laughing about a putt that broke the wrong way. He'd just gotten back from Pebble Beach. His wife had posted the pictures on Facebook that morning. I told him I needed $350 to cover my prescription. There was a long pause. Then he said, "Dad, we just put a deposit down on the lake house. Every dollar's spoken for right now." His wife came on the line and said something about how their accountant had locked everything up for the quarter. I asked if he could spare even $100. He told me he'd see what he could do next week. The line went quiet for a second, and then he said he had to go. The stakes were burning. I sat in my recliner with the phone in my lap for a long time after that. The house was cold. I'd been keeping the thermostat at 62 to save on the gas bill. Outside, snow was coming down the way it does in upstate New York in February, slow and patient, like it has all night to bury you. My name doesn't matter much for what I'm about to tell you. What matters is, I'm 68 years old. I worked 31 years as a high school shop teacher in Schenectady, and I taught my son how to drive, how to throw a curveball, how to balance a checkbook. I taught him a lot of things. Apparently, I forgot to teach him the one that mattered. About an hour later, my phone rang. It was my youngest, my daughter. She lives 20 minutes away in a duplex. She rents with her 2 boys. She'd heard from her brother somehow, or maybe she just had a feeling. She asked me straight out if I'd taken my insulin that day. I told her I'd handle it. She told me she was on her way. I tried to stop her. I told her the roads were bad, that her boys needed her home, that I'd figure it out by morning. She hung up on me. She showed up 40 minutes later in her Honda Civic with one headlight out, wearing the same waitress apron she wears at the diner on Route 5. She came through my front door without knocking, like she always does, and put a wad of cash on my kitchen table, $320. She told me it was tip money she'd been saving for her older boy's birthday in March. He was turning 10. He wanted one of those gaming consoles, she said, but he'd understand. I told her I couldn't take it. She told me to shut up and put my coat on. She was driving me back to Walgreens before they closed. In the car, she didn't say much. The heater in her Civic only worked on the highest setting, so we sat there in the rattle and the noise, watching the wipers fight the snow. At one point, she looked over at me and said, "Dad, why didn't you call me first?" I didn't have an answer for her. I think the truth was, I'd spent so many years being the one who showed up that I didn't know how to be the one who needed showing up for. And maybe somewhere underneath all that, I still believed my son would do the right thing if I gave him the chance. We got the insulin. She made me eat a grilled cheese at the diner on the way home, on the house, she said. Though I knew she'd cover it out of her next shift. When she dropped me off, she hugged me longer than she needed to. I stood on my porch and watched her taillights disappear. And that's when something inside me went quiet. Not angry, not even sad anymore. Just quiet, the way a room goes quiet right before somebody says something true. The next morning, I sat on my kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold and started thinking. I thought about the photograph on my mantle, my son at 7 years old, holding up a brook trout we'd caught together in the Adirondacks. I thought about the year his mother got sick, when he was 19 and home from Binghamton, and how he used to read to her in the afternoons because she couldn't focus on the page herself anymore. He'd been a good boy. Somewhere between then and now, somebody had hollowed him out and put a stranger inside. I thought about his wife, too. I'd met her exactly 4 times in 11 years. Once at their wedding in Saratoga, once at a Christmas dinner where they left after 40 minutes because she had a migraine, once at the hospital when their first child was born, and once when they passed through Schenectady on the way to Vermont and stopped for gas. That was it. 11 years. 4 times. My grandkids didn't know what my house smelled like. I had savings. Not much. Around $11,000 I'd been sitting on since the second mortgage got paid off. Money I'd told myself was for emergencies. I had my pension, which covered the basics if I was careful, and Social Security on top of that. I had this house, paid off, worth maybe $200,000 if I sold it tomorrow. And I had something else, something I hadn't thought about in years. In 2007, I'd been hit by a car in the school parking lot. A parent dropping off her kid late, going too fast in the snow, didn't see me coming around the dumpster. Broke my hip in 2 places. The school district's insurance had fought me on it for 3 years before settling. I'd spent the money on rehab and a new boiler. But I remembered something the lawyer told me back then, a man named Russell who'd handled the case. He said if I ever had pain that came back, anything related to the original injury, I should call him. There was language in the settlement about future complications. I'd forgotten about it for 15 years. My hip had been bothering me bad for the last 6 months. I'd been popping a lev like candy and limping more than I let on. I called Russell's old office on a Tuesday. He'd retired, but his daughter had taken over the practice. Her name was on the door now. I told her who I was and what I was thinking. She pulled my file out of storage. She called me back 2 days later and told me I had a case. A real one. She said she'd handle it on contingency. While she was working on that, I started doing some other things. My son had a real estate development company. He'd started it 8 years ago, after he left the consulting job in Albany. He built strip malls mostly, the kind with a nail salon, a dental place, a Verizon store, the kind nobody loves, but everybody uses. From the outside, it looked like he was doing well. New SUV every 2 years. Country club in Loudonville. The lake house deposit he'd just mentioned. But I'd taught shop class for 3 decades. I knew how to read blueprints. I knew how to look at something and figure out whether it was actually solid or whether it was held together with finishing nails and prayer. I started looking at my son the same way. I asked an old friend of mine, a man I used to bowl with, who'd retired from the county clerk's office. He still had friends down there. I asked him if he could pull some public records for me. Property filings, tax assessments, that kind of thing. Anything with my son's name on it. He told me he'd see what he could do. What he came back with 2 weeks later was not what I expected. My son's company had 3 properties in active foreclosure proceedings. He owed back taxes on 2 of them. There were mechanics' liens from contractors he hadn't paid. There was a lawsuit from a tenant who claimed he'd locked her out of her dry cleaning business in violation of her lease. The lake house deposit my son had mentioned, the one that supposedly tied up every dollar he had. My friend couldn't find any record of it. No closing scheduled. No earnest money in escrow under his name in any of the 3 counties where lake houses get sold around here. My son had lied to me. He hadn't refused to help because his money was tied up in a lake house. He'd refused to help because he didn't have it, and he dressed it up, so I'd feel guilty for asking. I sat with that for a while. I won't pretend it didn't hurt. There's a particular kind of pain that comes from realizing your child has been lying to your face for years, and you've been so busy trying to be a good father that you missed every signal. I made myself a sandwich and ate it standing at the counter. Then I called Russell's daughter and asked her if she knew a forensic accountant. She did. A woman in Albany who used to work for the IRS before she went private. I drove down there on a Wednesday morning with my checkbook and my friend's stack of public records. She looked everything over and told me she could do a deeper dive for $3,500. I wrote her the check. 3 weeks later, she sat me down in her office and walked me through it. My son had been running his company on borrowed money for at least 4 years. He'd taken out loans against properties that were already mortgaged. He'd shifted money between 3 different LLCs in ways she described as creative, bordering on fraudulent. She showed me one transaction where he'd pulled $48,000 out of his business account on the same day his property tax payment had bounced. The $48,000 had gone to a country club initiation fee. There was something else. She'd found a credit application in my name from 2019 for a business line of credit at a bank in Cohoes. $60,000. He'd used my social security number, my home address, and a signature that wasn't mine. The credit line had been drawn down to the maximum, and he'd been making minimum payments for years. I'd never seen a single statement because they'd been sent to a P.O. box in his name. That was the moment something shifted in me for good. The lying about the lake house I could maybe have understood. Pride does ugly things to people who feel like they're drowning. But forging my name on a $60,000 loan, that was theft. That was my own son robbing me while I taught him how to shake hands and look people in the eye. The accountant asked me what I wanted to do about it. I told her I needed to think. I drove home through the back roads, taking my time. The snow had melted finally, and the fields out by the river were that black, wet color they get in early March. I pulled over at one point, somewhere outside Niskayuna, and just sat there in my truck with the engine running. I thought about my daughter's $320. I thought about the gaming console her boy wasn't going to get for his birthday. I thought about my son sitting at the country club, eating lunch off plates I'd unknowingly paid for. The settlement money came through in April. Russell's daughter had been right about the case. She'd negotiated it without ever filing suit, just by sending the right letter to the right insurance company. After her cut, I walked away with $61,000. The check sat on my kitchen table for 2 days before I deposited it. I felt like once it cleared, I'd have to actually do what I was thinking about doing, and part of me still wanted to give my son a chance to make it right on his own. I called him on a Sunday. I didn't tell him about the settlement or the accountant or anything I'd found out. I told him I was struggling, that the medication costs were getting away from me, that I might have to start choosing between insulin and the gas bill. I asked him if he'd thought any more about helping. He sighed. He sighed the way you sigh at a coworker who keeps asking you to cover their shift. He told me he was working on something big, that there was money coming, that I just needed to hold on a few more months. He told me his wife had been very stressed lately and that he didn't want to upset her by bringing up money right now. He said, "Dad, you've always been so independent, I know you can figure this out." I told him I loved him and I hung up. That night I sat down at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and made a list. Names. People I knew my son had hurt or might have hurt. The contractor who'd put liens on the strip mall. The dry cleaner who'd been locked out. A guy named Tom my son had grown up with, who'd invested in one of his early projects and disappeared from the family Christmas card list around the same time. I started making calls. The dry cleaner was a woman in her 50s who'd come over from the Philippines in the 90s. She told me her story over coffee at a Dunkin' on Erie Boulevard. My son had raised her rent twice in 2 years, then claimed she was in violation of her lease over a sign she'd had up the entire time. He'd locked her out on a Saturday morning with all her customers' clothing inside. It had taken her 4 months and $7,000 in legal fees to get her business back. She'd lost half her clients. She told me she had every email, every letter, every text. The contractor was a younger guy, maybe 40, who ran a small drywall outfit out of Rotterdam. My son owed him $83,000 on a job he'd finished 18 months ago. He'd been stringing the contractor along with promises and partial payments. The contractor had 2 daughters and a mortgage, and he'd had to lay off 3 of his guys because of the cash flow problem my son had created. He told me he kept every invoice, every text message, every voicemail my son had left him over the past year and a half. Tom, the childhood friend, took the longest to track down. He'd moved to North Carolina. When I finally got him on the phone, he was quiet for a long time after I told him who I was. Then he said, "Your son owes me $92,000, and I haven't been able to look at his face since 2019. He'd put his retirement savings into one of my son's earliest projects, on the understanding that he was a co-investor. My son had restructured the deal 3 times, each time in language Tom didn't fully understand, and by the end of it, Tom had no equity, no return, and no recourse. The friendship had ended without a single argument. Tom had just stopped picking up the phone. I sat at my kitchen table and looked at my legal pad. By the time I was done with my calls, I had 19 names. 19 people my son had stiffed, lied to, manipulated, or stolen from. Some of them had small claims. Some of them had been ruined. In May, I went back to Russell's daughter. I told her what I wanted to do, and I asked her if it was possible. She said it was. She said it was DAC. She said it would take some money up front, but it was possible. What we did was this. Through a small holding company she helped me set up, using $45,000 of the settlement, I bought my son's debt. The bank and co-hos that held his fraudulent line of credit, the line he'd taken out in my name, was eager to sell it once they understood the situation. The contractor's claim I bought outright at 60 cents on the dollar, with the contractor's blessing once he understood the plan. He'd been about to write the whole thing off as a loss. Tom in North Carolina, I made whole every penny of his $92,000, and in exchange he assigned me his rights to pursue the original investment. The dry cleaner, I just paid her. I told her it was a gift from a man who taught his son better than this. She cried at the Dunkin' on Erie Boulevard. By the end of June, through a quiet little LLC named after the street my late wife and I had bought our first house on, I owned almost $200,000 of my son's obligations. He didn't know it. He thought he was juggling the same plates he'd always been juggling, ignoring the same calls, dodging the same letters. He had no idea those plates were all in my hands now. The forensic accountant called me in early July. She'd been keeping an eye on his filings. She told me he was about to make a move, refinancing one of his last unencumbered properties, trying to pull cash out to keep the rest of the operation alive. If I was going to do something, she said, this was the moment. I had Russell's daughter send him a letter, plain language. It informed him that several of his debts had been acquired by a holding company and that the company was calling them due. Full payment within 30 days, or formal legal action would commence. The letter was signed by her, on her firm's letterhead. It did not mention me. He called me 3 days later. I knew, the second I saw his name on my phone, exactly what was coming. His voice was different than I'd ever heard it. Smaller. He told me somebody was trying to destroy him. He told me he didn't know what he was going to do. He asked if I knew any lawyers, anyone who could help him fight this. He said his wife had taken the kids to her sister's in Connecticut for the week, that she was talking about staying. I asked him if he'd ever forged my name on a loan application. There was a silence on the other end of the line that went on for a long, long time, long enough that I started to think the call had dropped. Then I heard him breathing, ragged, and I heard him say, "Dad." Just that. Dad. I told him I knew everything. I told him about the accountant, the public records, the dry cleaner, the contractor, Tom in North Carolina. I told him I knew about the lake house that didn't exist. I told him I'd been sick with worry over the medication costs, while he was sitting at the country club eating lunch on a $60,000 credit line he'd taken out in my name. I told him his sister had given me her son's birthday money to keep me alive in February, and that he hadn't called once to check on me since. He started to cry. Not the careful kind. The other kind. He said he was sorry. He said he'd lost control of everything years ago and hadn't known how to come clean. He said he was scared. He said his wife had figured it out months ago. That's why she'd taken the kids. She didn't want them in the house when it all came apart. I let him cry. I didn't say anything for a while. I sat at my kitchen table with the phone against my ear, looking at the photograph on the mantel of him at 7 years old with the brook trout. I waited until he was quiet again. Then I told him what I was going to do. I told him I owned his debts. I told him I could foreclose, sue him personally for the forged credit line, refer the matter to the district attorney, and watch him lose everything inside of a year. I told him I had every right to. I told him part of me wanted to. But I told him part of me wanted to. But I told him I wasn't going to do that. Not yet. Not because he deserved mercy, but because his children deserved a father who could still walk down the street without everyone knowing what he'd done. I told him I had conditions. The first condition was that he would meet me at the VFW Hall in Schenectady in 2 weeks, on a Saturday morning. He would come alone. The contractor would be there. The dry cleaner would be there. Tom was driving up from North Carolina. His sister would be there. He would sit in a chair and listen to every one of them tell him exactly what he'd done to their lives, and he would not interrupt, and he would not defend himself. The second condition was that he would sign over 30% of his company to the contractor as repayment, with my old friend from the county clerk's office acting as trustee until the debts were satisfied. Tom would receive a permanent 10% stake, returned to him with interest. The dry cleaner would receive a written apology, hand-delivered, and a check for the remainder of her legal fees and lost income. The third condition was that the $60,000 he'd taken in my name, he would pay back to me with interest over the next 10 years. Every month. On the first, if he missed a single payment, I would file the criminal complaint. The fourth condition was that he would call his sister. Not to apologize, not yet, just to listen. He would ask her what her boys needed. He would ask her how she'd been. He would do this every Sunday for the rest of my life, and after that, for the rest of his. He agreed to all of it. He agreed before I'd finished laying it out. The Saturday at the VFW hall was the hardest day of my life. Harder than the day my wife died, in a different way. 22 people came. I hadn't even invited all of them. Word had gotten around. The contractor brought his wife. Tom brought his oldest son, who's a Marine home on leave. The dry cleaner brought her daughter. My daughter brought her 2 boys, who sat in the back and didn't really understand what was happening, but knew it was important. My son walked in at 10 o'clock sharp. He looked thinner than I'd seen him in years. He sat in the chair we put in the middle of the room, and one by one, 22 people told him what he'd done. Some of them shouted, some of them cried. The dry cleaner's daughter spoke for her mother in English, and there was a moment where my son tried to say something and the daughter held up her hand and told him no. You listen, this is the listening part. He listened for 3 hours. He didn't eat the lunch we put out. When the last person had spoken, he stood up and he walked over to my daughter, and he got down on his knees in front of her 2 boys, and he told them he was sorry he hadn't been a better uncle. The older boy, the one whose birthday money had paid for my insulin, looked at him for a long second and then put his hand on my son's shoulder, the way a grown man does. That was 8 months ago. He's made every payment so far. The contractor got his 30%. Tom is back on the Christmas card list. The dry cleaner sent me a fruit basket at Thanksgiving. My son's wife came back from Connecticut in October, and they've been seeing a counselor twice a week. The country club membership got canceled. He drives a used Camry now. He calls his sister every Sunday at 4 o'clock. I know because she calls me at 5 and tells me about it. I'm not going to tell you my son is a good man now. I don't know yet. 8 months isn't enough to know. What I will tell you is that the boy who held up that brook trout in the Adirondacks, I think he might still be in there somewhere. And I think the only chance he had of finding his way back to that boy was for somebody to stop letting him get away with it. My daughter still works at the diner on Route 5. I see her every Wednesday for breakfast. Her older boy got the gaming console for his birthday in March, the way he should have. I bought it. I told her it was from his uncle, but she knew it was from me, and she let me have it that way. The insulin still costs $347 a month. I pay for it now without thinking about it. The settlement money will run out eventually, but by then my son's payments to me will have made up the difference. And after that, well, we'll see. I'll tell you the thing I keep coming back to. The night my daughter drove through the snow to bring me her tip money, I remember standing on my porch and watching her taillights go. And I remember thinking, in that quiet way I told you about, that I'd spent my whole life believing that family was the people whose blood you shared. And it took me 68 years and almost dying of stubbornness to figure out that family is the people who show up. Just the people who show up. Everybody else is something else. And you can love them and you can hope for them, but you can't lean on them. You can't bet your life on them. The ones who show up, those are the ones you build a life around. I'm not angry with my son anymore. I was for a while. I'm something else now. I'm watchful. I'm careful. I'm hopeful in the way. You're hopeful when you've planted something and you don't know yet if it'll come up. If you've got somebody in your family who only shows up when they need something, who lies to you about money, who treats your love like a line of credit, I want you to hear me. You don't have to keep paying that bill. You can love somebody and still stop letting them rob you. You can be a good father and still draw a line. You can hand them a mirror and walk out of the room. That's the thing nobody told me when my kids were little. I thought my job was to keep loving them no matter what they did. And it is, in a way, but loving somebody and protecting yourself from somebody, those aren't the same thing. They aren't even close. And the day I figured that out was the day I started getting my life back. If this story meant something to you, sit with it for a minute. Then think about who in your life has been showing up, who's been quietly carrying you, and go tell them you saw it. Tell them today. Don't wait until you're standing on a porch in the snow watching their taillights, wishing you'd said it sooner. That's the whole thing. That's everything I learned. Take care of yourselves out there. I've turned this over in my head 1,000 times since that February night, and what I keep coming back to is a simple truth I wish somebody had handed me 30 years ago. Every choice we make is a seed. We don't always see what grows from it, and we don't always get to choose when the harvest comes. But the harvest comes. My son Marcus made his choices long before that phone call about the insulin. He made them in small ways, year after year, when he stopped returning calls, when he started measuring people by what they could do for him, when he learned that a smooth excuse worked just as well as the truth. By the time I asked him for $347, his character was already what it was. The phone call didn't make him into anything. It just showed me what he'd been quietly building for a decade. My daughter Lorraine made her choices too. She made them at the diner on Route 5. Working doubles when our boys had the flu. She made them every time she put her own birthday money or her tax refund towards somebody else's need. Nobody ever clapped for her. There were no ribbons, no announcements. She just kept showing up. And when the night came that I needed her, the showing up was already in her bones. She didn't have to think about it. The snowstorm didn't matter. The birthday money didn't matter. She'd been practicing for that moment her whole life without knowing it. That's the law I want you to take with you. Who you are in the small moments is who you'll be in the big ones. There's no separate version of yourself that shows up when the stakes get high. The version that shows up is the one you've been rehearsing. I think about wisdom too, and how I almost didn't have enough of it to get through this. For months I told myself my son was just busy, just stressed, just going through a phase. I made excuses for him because the truth hurt too much to look at. Wisdom isn't always about knowing what to do. Sometimes it's just about being willing to see clearly, when seeing clearly is the hardest thing in the world. The day I let myself look at Marcus the way I'd look at a stranger doing the same things, that was the day I started getting my life back. And courage. I want to talk about that for a second. I'm 68 years old, and I'd never confronted my own son about anything serious until this past year. I told myself it was love. It wasn't. It was fear. Fear of losing him, fear of what people would say. Real love sometimes looks like sitting your boy down in a room full of people he hurt and letting him hear it. That takes courage. Not the loud kind. The quiet kind that costs you something. If you're listening to this and there's somebody in your life who's been treating your love like a debit card with no limit, I want you to hear me. Be honest with yourself first, then be honest with them. You owe them the truth more than you owe them comfort. And the people who've been quietly carrying you, the Lorraines in your life, go tell them tonight. Don't wait for the snowstorm.